All right, welcome everybody. So we're just letting everybody kind of filter in the room here, but hello to everybody who's already joined us. I am super, super excited for tonight. You guys are going to learn so much and it's going to be so exciting. I did want to start off tonight with our land acknowledgement. So Edmonton is located within Treaty 6 territory and within the Métis homeland and Métis Nation of Alberta Region 4. The lands on which Edmonton sits and the North Saskatchewan River that runs through it have been the sites of natural abundance, ceremony and culture, travel and rest, relationship building, creating, and trading for Indigenous peoples since time immemorial. We acknowledge that this land is the traditional territories of many First Nations, such as the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Stoney, as well as the Blackfoot, later the Métis, and the Inuit. The city of Edmonton owes its strength and vibrancy to these lands and the diverse Indigenous peoples whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this territory, as well as settlers from around the world who continue to be welcomed here and call Edmonton home. Together, we call upon our collective honor traditions and spirits to work in building a great city for today and future generations. So for those who are just meeting us for the first time, I'm Madison Cote. I'm the Communications and Outreach Officer here at the Edmonton Screen Industries office. We are part film commission, part video games. And so we are so excited to be able to do one that encompasses both. So we'd like to welcome everybody. Just a reminder as well before we get going with Galen's presentation is that there are some events coming up. So if you're interested in learning more about motion capture, Stephen Gilmore will actually be hosting with Tom Vinica, our CEO, as well as a few more people from the NATE side of things during Startup Week on October 19th. So make sure to check out Startup Week, especially if you want to learn about motion capture, because they have a very cool facility there. We also have a career fair for jobs in the video game industry that is going to be coming up on October 20th with Startup Edmonton as well. So make sure to check that out. And inclusive game design is something we're going to be chatting about on October 21st. So that's going to be a joint event with the Gameplay Space out of Montreal, which is Jason De La Roca's place. So we're super excited to be working with them, as well as it is the Edmonton International Film Festival right now. So feel free to check it out if you haven't yet so far. It does run until the 10th, but I know it is the long weekend. So try to get maybe a digital pass or something like that. And then the next weekend is the Edmonton Short Film Festival. And we're so excited for this though, what's coming up here. So we do have our Q&A option that you can feel free to put a question in there, or you can feel free to put it in chat. I will be monitoring that so that Galen can go into his presentation. But anything that you want to leave there, please feel free. We also have a poll at the end, as well as a survey that'll be going out. So please make sure to fill that out so that we can continue to offer some really fun workshops. We're super excited that we opened this one up as well. So it's not just Edmonton will be attending. I did see some Calgary names on that list. So welcome to our friends down south, as well as anybody who is from somewhere else. But let's introduce Galen. So award-winning filmmaker, absolutely amazing. 10 years in games and marketing, as well as 20 within film, design, and new media. You've worked on all levels of game marketing. So production, creative strategy, editorial, writing, directing, in-game, engine cinematics, and film shoots. So basically, if it can be made, you have made it. So we're so excited today to have Galen with us. He'll be doing a presentation for the first hour, followed by the Q&A. And so we'll be super excited to see the questions that you have. And 100%, we can definitely fill anybody in on any of the events that I mentioned earlier. And feel free to just check us out at Edmonton Screen everywhere. And we will definitely post more information. But on that, take it away, Galen, and I'll get out of everybody's hair.
Thanks, Madison. Hello, everyone. I've never actually done a Zoom presentation like this to a faceless crowd, so bear with me. It feels weird, but hopefully I get through it okay. So to give a little context up front, I will try as much as I possibly can to be cognizant of all screen media. Definitely my background is primarily within the video game industry. I've worked at BioWare I worked there for 5-6 years. I'm currently at another studio in Edmonton called Improbable, working on a title that is unannounced. So most of my work has been within the sort of AAA space, but have done a little bit of work for some indie stuff. And so I'll be talking about some of my experiences, thinking about not just the creative, but what informs the creative, which is the strategy. To kick things off, though, I will start with my demo reel, just to give you a quick taste of some of the stuff I've done. As Madison mentioned, I started on Mass Effect 2, did all the trailers for Mass Effect 2, then left for a couple of years, worked at an ad agency, and then worked on Dragon Age, Inquisition, Mass Effect Andromeda, Anthem, and then a bunch of other EA titles like Plants vs. Zombies and Star Wars. So I'll give you little clips of the work I've done, and then get into some of the strategy.
This path began a long time ago. A course paved through human history that took us across continents, oceans, and ultimately to the stars.
We will say goodbye, and you will look back one last time. And know that wherever you go, we will be with you. This is Commander Shepard, signing off.
All right, nothing like a little excitement from a demo reel. Oops. All right, so things I'm going to talk about today. I don't necessarily just want to jump right into the art of editing and making trailers, because that is sort of driving blind. What's important to understand with any sort of creative process within marketing is the strategy that it sort of fuels that. And so what I want to start with is thinking about, while not all campaigns and video games or shows are equivalent, there are certain things that you need to understand of what you're making, who you're making it for, what kind of genre you're making things for. Thinking about where you're making things within the sales funnel. I have some stuff, some slides on a case study to look at, specifically around a title that is like an independent studio that built a game independently for 4 years before actually launching it, and looking at some of the campaign that they created around that, and then getting into some of the craft, specifically around thinking about how to create structure with your edits, your trailers, getting the kind of right footage to make your trailer, some tips around that, and then of course some ideas around the actual edit itself and the importance of music. Okay, so the campaign. Obviously, not everything is equal. I have had the absolute pleasure and great opportunity to work from multi-million-dollar marketing budgets, where you can really push the limits in terms of scope of projects and the kinds of multiple assets. I worked on one small indie project called Kitten Assassin, which was working with two studios in Edmonton. One, Mosaic, and that did a TV show. This was the idea of this one was came out of a TV show that was shot here in Edmonton. And the idea within the TV show, the actual fictional game that they created was called Kitten Assassin. And so in this particular case, it is literally a single trailer for the entire campaign, targeted primarily towards mobile store ads. So huge variety of stuff. I'll quickly, I think this will trigger.
They took his mother. They enslaved his brother. They killed his father. One cute little kitten has been pushed too far.
Brave like a tabby with the aim of an eagle, but the patience of a sloth.
You are the Kitten Assassin.
My only regret is that I will never know what hit them.
Download the game now on iOS, Android, and Amazon.
Yes, Tiny Plastic Man. Thanks, Dave. So a little fun, lighthearted humor around Kitten Assassin. Okay, so big question, obviously, is really for anyone in the who is creating video games or movie, TV shows, is really thinking about how to and when to create a marketing campaign. How many assets is really the number of platforms and the expectations to be everywhere is really daunting. And so it's easy to become overwhelmed, but it's important to really understand which areas are the priorities, especially for smaller budgets. Typically the priority assets for most video games is really thinking about typically three trailers, where you have an announcement, followed up at some point with kind of a deeper gameplay, and then some kind of launch. Now that doesn't cover cover it for everyone. Often for first-time games, you need to think about ad spends. Influencer marketing is probably one of the biggest changes over the past 10 years, where getting the game played by people on Twitch is really vital to kind of the success of a lot of games. So secondary assets, everything from thinking about different types of social media cuts from 6 seconds to 30 seconds, third-party exclusive videos, digital storefront. So digital storefront would be anything from like Steam Store, iOS Store, Android. I imagine within, for filmmakers, this would be Amazon Store, anywhere you'd be looking at downloading or purchasing a movie. Tutorials, cohort ads. Cohort ads really are about like specifically targeting certain demographics and interests within that you'd be targeting your ads towards. Dev diaries, the list goes on. And then of course, when you have the opportunity for, bigger AAA studios have the budgets to stretch a little bit and have fun with things like CG trailers, short films, TV spots, and live action. That's where some of the bigger, more well-known ads kind of get a lot of attention to a broader audience. So obviously lots to think about in terms of where you are showing up, how you're showing up, but and without getting too bogged down in feeling overwhelmed, really thinking about the way that you balance the sort of the logic side of the creative that you make and the sort of creative side. So often we think about the features and the things that your audience are expecting and wanting to see, the things that they can sort of like place the flag on and say, oh, okay, I get what this game or movie is. And that's mixed, of course, with what's original with whatever you're creating. With your game, it could be the setting, it could be the story, it could be the art style, the thing that really will catch people's attention that stands apart from everything else within the genre that you're creating. Really thinking about, again, what your audience is looking for, their expectations that matches what they want. And of course, what will surprise them. So looking at some of those things I mentioned. What makes it the same, what makes you unique. Big thing, and I'll talk more about this, is not only within the marketing campaign, but within your product, your game, your movie, is understanding the genre expectations. A lot of projects fail because they're pushing the boundaries a little bit too much, and people have a harder time to understand what the product is or the game is that they're looking. So really understanding how you are selling within a certain genre, and of course how you're evolving that genre. You don't want to simply be a carbon copy. And again, logical, and on the right side, thinking about the kind of emotional appeal. We often think about within the video game, developing video games, is the kind of 60-30-10 rule. Now, this isn't necessarily a hard and fast scientific number system, but it's a really kind of interesting and useful guide. What's weird is that in some ways you need to be a little bit more unoriginal in your overall execution. And I know that may seem counterintuitive, but often the creative spirit, when you are making something, you want to push the boundaries, or you may want to push the boundaries and be as original as possible. The risk when doing that is that you end up confusing a potential audience. They don't quite understand where your piece of entertainment fits within the genres. Now, within marketing, that sort of that balance between the predictable and the original, it can be a little bit more fluid. So depending on how many video assets that you're creating within a campaign, you may be able to slide to have an asset much more of kind of a logical focus versus a creative focus, and something that isn't necessarily completely representative of the game, but gets across the kind of the tone and the emotion of the game. And if for campaigns that can't afford to do a lot, if you're only doing one or two assets, typically you want to really emphasize more on the predictable side, while still in the 10 to 20% figuring out how to still excite people with your unique take. Now, thinking more about genre, an important thing when you are selling your game is that you're not necessarily trying to convert someone to convince them that they should like your game. Like, you would never go to someone who likes heavy metal and try and necessarily convince them that they should listen to your country music. You are finding the tribe who will be predisposed to liking your product, and proving to them why your product is the right thing for you. So again, it's really understanding what the audience, the tribe is that you're targeting, and how you market towards them. So as a sort of analogy that I saw recently, which I thought was quite effective, if you think about these different shapes as genres, when a potential customer comes into, let's say, Steam store, they are essentially thinking about, okay, I like this style of game. I like a city builder game, or I like a survival game, a first-person shooter game. And so they are thinking, as they are scrolling through a store, okay, what within this market fits my expectations of the kind of game I would like to play? Not necessarily looking for the thing that is the standout, most unique and original thing. It is, oh, I like city builders, so where's the city builder within the store? And so they have their sort of their shape, and they're trying to match that to their expectations. If they come across a game or marketing that just isn't quite clear in terms of what it is, it's got a little bit of this and a little bit of this, it's got a little city builder, It's got a little bit of survival. It's got, some story in there. They're kind of end up scratching their head and it's like, oh, I don't get this, and they skip really quickly. So it's really important to understand, again, what your genre is and how you're selling within that genre. Okay, sales funnel. Doesn't sound very exciting, but it's really, again, super important to understand. This isn't by any means, this is a very sort of common model within marketing and sales. I'm not by any means an expert within this, but thinking about it as coming at it from the side of the creative, of how you are thinking about creating stuff within certain parts of the sales funnel. So a sales funnel is essentially, if you think about reaching at the top side where the blue, you're reaching the most number of people possible. You're also spending the most amount of people reaching that. So this is where you're going to be doing things like ad spends, TV ads, creative that typically is a little bit more expensive, that has a broader reach, but it's kind of a broad fishing technique of trying to reach the greatest number of people who may be interested. Once you get that kind of certain, let's say you get 5 million eyeballs on it, a certain percentage of that will begin to have an interest within the thing that you have made. So at this point, you're really trying to build that trust and transparency of the game or movie that you've made. And this is also where you really start to build that core audience and a loyal community. And that really helps to foster continued growth within your marketing. And then at the end of the cycle of the funnel, you have the actual decision process. There's a few other steps within here, but at a crude level, from awareness to interest, the actual point of sale, of super targeted, super direct, and finding really talking to the person, the gamer or the moviegoer who is most likely to make that final purchase. Obviously, it's a daunting task to launch a game, especially as a new studio. And there are typically, crude kind of breakdown. Let's say that there's essentially 3 ways in which you can sort of reach an audience. There is relying on your built-in audience from previous projects. And also what part of this is, like, even if you're doing a new project, thinking about how you foster community now so that in future projects, you can harness that community that you've developed over the course of years. This is super important. These people tend to be the most loyal, the most willing to purchase. And if you capture them early on, they're the cheapest to turn into customers later on. So super important, but sometimes not feasible. But actually going back to the first point, this is where you can do things like teases. If you know that you have an audience expecting and waiting for a new game or movie that you've come out with, this is where you can start to really tease a new release that you're coming out with. Then, of course, the next obvious way is just brute force purchasing. So these are things like ad spends, PR, social media, paying influencers to play your game. That's, again, probably one of the most important aspects of any marketing campaign now, especially for video games, is paying people on Twitch to play your game. And the third, which is the most time consuming, and it's tied in to some extent with the first point, is really spending the time to build a loyal core audience who is interested in the product that you're making. More and more video games are using a kind of early access model where they are having people begin to play their game sometimes 2-3 years before the actual final release, just to get user tests. And there's a lot of people, and there's even sites dedicated to this, where you can harness a community of people. If you are making a genre specific game, like let's say survival, there are, let's say 5 million, there's probably more than that. Let's say there are 5 million survival game enthusiasts in the world. The more that you can really build interest in the product, that the new thing, there's a lot of people who can and want to come in early, play your game, and give feedback. And so this aspect is a huge part of marketing now too. Okay, so I'll do a quick case study that specifically looks at a survival game. This is called Subnautica. It's from an independent studio in the US. In a nutshell, this survival game is essentially you're on an alien planet, you've crash landed, the entire experience takes place underwater. Now, as a genre, the survival genre has a certain number of tropes. Just like in movies with like a romance movie, there are certain tropes that most movies, romance movies, will follow in terms of a kind of structure that people expect. Now, the survival genre is typically you start from nothing and you slowly build and use the environment around you to survive and ultimately thrive. Another big aspect to this is not only collecting things, but also building, crafting, so that you're actually building a kind of a space of housing for yourself. So again, lots of tropes and expectations. And Subnautica, their unique take on it is essentially it's completely underwater survival game on an alien planet. Oops. So what I have here is, again, this is very unique in terms of a strategy. Not a lot of games may do as much as what Subnautica has done. But what I've done here is show a sort of timeline. Each of these lines on that timeline is a single video asset that they've created. So over the course of 7 years, which actually encompasses 2 major releases, they've done about 50 progress videos, 4 gameplay trailers, 4 CG trailers, and they've released a bunch of soundtracks as well. The smaller yellow ticks are their progress videos. These are kind of low-hanging fruit, really targeted towards their core audience of their most loyal fan base. Then you have certain key moments when they are ready to have a larger release and they want to bring more people in. For example, at a early access release, this is, again, not the full final release, but a kind of taste of what's to come. And so we call that a early access. And so they would do, typically, if they're now wanting to bring in, let's say, 50,000 people to test out the game, they're pushing a little bit harder in terms of the kind of reach that they would do and the kind of asset that they're creating. So again, thinking about what that kind of cadence is and what the types of trailers would help to bring more people in. And then ultimately, their big tentpole assets are their CG assets. And this is where they're going to be investing quite heavily within the marketing. Probably each of these trailers are close to, if not more than $1 million. So can be very costly, especially for an independent studio. But in terms of numbers, this is a rough representation of the views per video. So typically on average, this is 100% accurate, but typically the average view is about 500,000. And the CG trailers would typically, now there's probably a bit of an ad spend behind it, but because they were trying to reach a broader audience, their target is between 3 and 10 million views for each of those CG assets. And interestingly enough, things like soundtracks can actually be these sort a different way in which to get audiences. And some of their soundtracks are actually getting close to 2 million views on the songs themselves. Okay, I won't show the whole thing, but I've got a couple of videos just to give you a taste of some of the things that they've created. What's really interesting to me here is from the point in which they've got their launch, which is early 2018, their very first video was late 2013. So essentially, more or less a 4-year window from initially talking to a potential audience to the point in which they've got a public release. So this is an example of their first trailer that they did.
Unknown Worlds has begun work on a new game, Subnautica. It is an open world.
Oh, sorry. Oh.
Unknown Worlds has begun work on a new game, Subnautica. It is an open world underwater exploration and construction game. Right now, this game is in dry dock. The hull is being assembled, technology is being tested, and the crew is in training. Development has started, and you are invited to participate. We want to share every moment of development with you. Every failure, every success, every setback, every breakthrough. Over the coming months, we hope you will join us. We hope you will tell us what we are doing right and what we are doing wrong, and help us to stay on course. We hope this game will give you wonderful experiences, not just when it is released, but throughout development. This will...
I'm going to stop it there, but you get the idea. Really, the goal here is to start an honest conversation, bring that loyal fan base in. Even, they may have not planned for a 4-year production cycle, but for them, that was really important. A strategy to get people in as early as possible. Oops, and now I've just messed up my... oh, sorry. Okay. Next, won't show much of this, but this is an example of an update, progress update. It's literally, and at certain times they were doing about one of these every 6 weeks. So typically they're putting in new content in the game. They're showing what that content is. Nothing, groundbreaking or anything. But in this particular case, they've got, oh, look, you've got an observatory. That's a new feature. Our super core fans are going to love that. And then finally, when they come to a major release, such as like an early access or the actual final release, they're coming out with a more polished gameplay video. And at this point, this is the thing that those who are doing a purchase decision are really looking to see, okay, is this the game I want? How does this sort of check my expectations of the genre, the survival genre? Gives a little bit of introduction to the world, sets the context, who you are within it, your challenges, and then a whole bunch of gameplay features. And last but not least, why is it not going? They've got CG trailers. Now, it is a gamble. CG trailers don't always work. They don't always perform as much as gameplay trailers. But in certain circumstances, when you're trying to reach a significantly larger audience, they can be really effective. What's kind of funny is how similar it is to the gameplay trailer, but likewise, it is much more successful in terms of reaching just the sheer numbers.
I've been dreaming of it for months.
A little bit more of a story focused, feels a little bit more polished than the actual game cinematic, the game moments.
The crash seems so long ago now.
But it's telling a little bit more of a story and around the player fantasy. Okay, but I'm going to keep moving because I'm already halfway through. Why is it still going? Sorry. Keeps going out of full screen. Okay. All right. Now, I haven't been paying attention to Q&A. No questions. By all means, if there's questions, stop me. Happy to take any along the way. Otherwise, I'll just keep plowing through and we can have a conversation at the end. Okay, so now into some thoughts around the craft. Structure. You know, any sort of video project needs to start from the ideation phase. And that is really around how you structure the moments, the beats within your trailer to hit certain things. So one of the most important things is, of course, grabbing the attention, or we call it the hook. This is the thing you want to start right from the get-go. We know that attention spans are really short, especially for people who don't know who you are, aren't know nothing about your project. It's really important that you are starting with your absolute best material. You are showing the thing that is super unique about your project or film. That, you know, it could be the visuals, it could be a game mechanic, it could be a story angle, the setting. Whatever you feel is the thing that is the most unique needs to be the thing at the very front to grab people's attention. I will ask that about live action trailers. That's a good question, Dave. Yeah, it's debatable. I have mixed feelings about them, but I have seen some really good executions. That it always comes down to the execution, the creative within it. Gameplay or tell and show. So the kind of, now I'm not necessarily prescribing that there's one way to do a gameplay video, but if you're looking for ways in which to think about how you structure creative, there's a fairly, it seems fairly straightforward, but it's really about telling and showing. So you're focusing on the things that the player can do in the game rather than the list of the features. So you're not listing technical features of, you're going to conquer 5 bosses and you're going to have 100 weapons that you can go from. It's really more about the engrossing story mechanics of the worlds and the things and the goals that you can do with them. So in a way, it's thinking about the fantasy of the game than it is about a set of features. Whoops. And a typical structure for a gameplay or a tell and show trailer is you start again with that, the idea. What is the hook, or what's the kind of game that you're making? Again, hitting that genre. So within the first 10 seconds, someone immediately knows, oh, I get it. This is a survival game, or this is a TTS, or this is a city builder. Like, you want them to know within the first 5 to 10 seconds what you are making and what if this is something worthwhile for them to watch. And then again, the hook. Again, what's the thing that's really unique about your version of this genre? And then once you have sort of established those things, you may want to get into things like what the player is within, what their role is within the world. But then it's really about the kind of things that the player can do. And in terms of the overall length, typically the general rule of thumb is it really depends on how much content that you can show that constantly feels like it's fresh. As soon as you start to feel like the footage is repeating itself, then you just need to cut it off. So for example, with the Kitten Assassin, it's a very, very simple concept of a video. You are an assassin, you shoot dogs in the head, and that's it. You can't prolong that kind of trailer for more than 30 seconds without it being repetitive. And then my favorite are obviously probably those within the film and TV industry thinking about story trailers. And the way I tend to break story trailers down is thinking about them in 4 to 5 acts. Very similar to how you might script out the actual story itself, where you are essentially telling a story of what the microcosm of the story. Obviously, questions around and concerns around spoilers and showing too much, but there's ways around that. So typically, you want to start with that cold opener, establishing what the genre and tone is immediately. Setting the exposition. So what's the world? What's the overall premise? Who are the people? Who's the hero? If it's a game, what's your role within this world? It's really setting up the things, the mechanics that the audience needs to know to understand the rest of the trailer. Then quite quickly, you introduce what the problem is and what the main people want within that. So if it's a story about I need to rob a bank, the problem is I need to rob a bank. How then the plan is, then the next act is what's the plan to rob the bank? And you somehow describe in a fun way what the plan is. It can be fairly short, depends. And then at the end, it's a whole series of obstacles that are in the way of executing said plan. Generally, I think a lot of game developers feel very precious, for good reason, about the kinds of footage that are shown in trailers and the feeling of, and it always comes up, this idea of what a spoiler is. My general rule of thumb is that if it is out of context, you should use it. If it's the best material that you have to get people excited about what it is you are making, then you should seriously consider using that footage. If you are, on the flip side, telling people or answering all the questions that you are posing, then you are giving away the story. And that's when it starts to feel like, oh, well, you just told me the entire story. But if you are simply showing your best material somewhat out of context and not solving the problem or the questions, my argument is that's fair game. And there are a lot of studies that do show that the more general audiences don't mind stories somewhat being spoiled. Separate debate, but that is why a lot of Hollywood movies do end up feeling a little spoilery, because they focus test this stuff so much that a mass market audience tends to want to know more than you would think you would want to show. So that's a bit of an aside. Here's an example of a gameplay video that I did for Star Wars Squadrons. I won't show the whole thing, it's fairly long, but you'll get the idea of how I'm creating the overall structure in terms of, down here I've got a general timeline of, okay, what's the idea, which is this, what's the game and the genre that we're in for, what's the hook, or as in, what's the thing that's original? In this case, you just need to say Star Wars Pilot Simulator, and you've got millions of people wanting to play. And then we go into who you are, and then after that, the things that you can do, and the goal and your goals.
The second Death Star is gone, but the Imperial fleet is still a threat. Vanguard Squadron, let's make history.
This is it, Titan Squadron. Everything we've done has led to this. Finish those Vanguard scum!
This is Star Wars Squadrons. Earn your wings in a single-player story spanning 2 factions.
All stations, fire on that ship!
Anyway, it
And
continues
master
on.
multiplayer battles
At this
as a
point,
squadron
I'll
of
skip
5.
forward a little bit.
Begin your career in a
Establishing
single-player
who you
story.
are within the world. You play a pilot
Where
on
you'll play
both
as
sides.
2 combat pilots, flying for both the Empire and the New Republic.
And then after that, it really gets into these are all the different kinds of modes and things you get to do, and really playing out the fantasy of being that pilot within Star Wars.
The story of the 2 pilots you play.
And again, it's really structured on tell and show, tell and show.
Let him have it.
And it keeps on bumping at me out of, right. Okay, now let's talk about, ooh, I'm running out of time. Okay, footage. Video games are super difficult to capture footage for. A lot of people underestimate how you do it. It's not just about a matter of playing the game and capturing some footage. You really need to be super intentional about how you're capturing footage. So everything that you do needs to be focusing typically on one thing at a time. You don't want to show 2 features competing against each other or having a screen that is way too busy. So cause and effect, thinking about when you're capturing, making it super clear that there's a action and reaction relationship. When a game mechanic is triggered, you not only see the mechanic, but then you see the effect of that mechanic on the environment. Really, it's super important that less is more. Retention of just some knowledge is way more important than just the quantity. So you really want to, as you're talking about certain features and things within your game, you want to be focused on one thing at a time and limit that information noise. And part of that is just trying your best to reduce screen clutter. If it means zooming in, reframing, so on and so forth. Composition and camera, super important, thinking about the overall framing. The easiest thing to do is do a center frame for everything. Some games aren't quite set up for that. Another good thing to do is thinking about if you're able to cheat the camera in FlyCam, situating things on the kind of a rule of thirds for composition. It makes your footage feel much more polished as opposed to just someone in their basement capturing footage. Motion matching and eye tracing is super important in terms of for certain games, there's so much action going on the screen that if you have things happening on one side of the screen, on the left side, and then the next cut, it's happening on the right side, what you're asking the viewer to do is constantly look for and figure out what it is that they need to be looking at. And so the more that they have to figure out what it is that they're looking at, that they're being distracted from the actual content itself. So thinking about how you, in the edit, you're cutting from a certain motion, you're using that subject matter to to make sure that the eye is able to very easily and fluidly follow the action. Here's a good example of a side scroller that whoever made this did a fantastic job of this kind of motion matching or eye tracking. So turn the audio down. So notice on every single cut from location to location, the character is constantly within the same space of the screen. So the person who's doing this isn't making the viewer constantly look for this tiny little character on the screen. The screen is really busy. So the challenge here is to make sure that you are actually making it as easy as possible for your audience to follow the action within these very busy screens and a very small character within them. Okay, the edit. Music. I'll start with music. simply because it is the driving force of trailers, more so than any other, I would say, video format. The music is really, in some ways, the thing that is defining the edit and the tone. And so finding that right music, spending that time up front to get the right track that fits the act structure that you would like to communicate is super important. Sometimes that means, and this is ultimately where a good majority of the emotion comes from. I would say the balance of, for movies, it is the facial expressions, the reactions of the characters on screen, what they are going through, mixed with the music. And that sort of relationship you can't underestimate, and you really ultimately need to sort of embrace it. Finding music that is appropriate to your story is also really important. Don't feel like you need to do the big epic drama music all the time. If it doesn't fit, finding the right tone and is super important. And also really finding that music that fits the act structure that you have in your script that you're thinking about. So where it rises and falls, sometimes you might need more than one track to do that. If you find there's a lot of trailer music companies out there that automatically build in a lot of these rises and falls for you to make it a little bit easier because it's so important. But sometimes you just might need to have multiple tracks and know how to dip out of them and come back into them. Of a sort of technical thing that is really important and useful to do is create markers on all the major beats of the music in your timeline. And that's literally doing like, pushing the M key on your in your editor, like Premiere, and putting literally a marker on the beat of every drum beat. And then that really helps you to, like, not necessarily cutting on those beats, but emphasizing those beats is really helpful. So you'll often see, explosions or gunshots or whatever on those beats. Sometimes it's an image cut. The benefit of it is that if it's not overdone, it can actually really help your audience, the brain, follow the action. Our brains are just sort of like timing into that music beat, and when those things are happening, it's actually quite pleasing. Layering in sound effects to accentuate music hits as well is and so you'll often see, like, a bit of a trope nowadays is, when you got the boom 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 in the music, and then you have the a gun going off that times with that music as well. And I mentioned this, don't overuse cutting on the beat. If your audience starts to see the structure that you've built, they can kind of start to go, it becomes predictable. So I tend to use more of using things in shots to hit on beats as opposed to cutting on a beat. Again, one idea at a time in your edit. Clarity is king. Can't emphasize that enough. If you're having trouble telling your story, keep it easy on yourself. Keep it logical. Linear order is totally fine. It's often the best and makes for the information easy to consume. And again, back to this idea of like rising and fall. You don't typically want to have a single note trailer where it's just like the same thing throughout the entire thing. You want to really build tension, and then having these peaks and valleys throughout your edit. So build tension, release, build tension, insert joke, excitement, a failure, action, hero, logo, joke. So you're getting that sort of variety, and you're telling a story within the sort of the beats of the trailer. May seem obvious, but in a gameplay trailer, if you're saying something, make sure that you're showing something that coincides with that. I can bring this up at the end, but just because music is so important, here's some of the vendors that I've used. If you're looking for music that is affordable, things like Music Bed and Epidemic Sound are really helpful. They do typically monthly licenses, and it's as much music as you want within that monthly license. So super helpful. I think Music Bed provides stems for the music as well, which allows more creative control in the edit. If you have the ability to, have a bit more money, some of the premium trailer houses out there who do, pretty much all of the big Hollywood trailers. These are some of the ones I've had the chance to use. Really does make a big difference and makes your job a lot easier if you have that really strong beat or the kind of emotional resonance within the music. And some of these companies I find some of the best out there. Sound design, can't skip that. I tend to do about 60 to 70% of my sound design and then send it off to a company who will essentially take what I've done and just make it much, much better. And it really makes a huge difference. So don't skip out on that kind of stuff. What are you doing for time? Oh, it's almost 7. Okay. Let me just show you one quick trailer. And just in terms of the sort of story structure, this is like a textbook example. Again, not necessarily the only way to do this, but if you're again having trouble thinking about how to tell your story in a really concise manner, look at other trailers, how they're doing it. And this is like, again, textbook example of cold opener, exposition, set the problem, set the plan, what are the obstacles, and you're out. So quickly show this as a great example. And you'll see this pattern repeat in a lot of big Hollywood trailers.
It's not about control. Stand down. It's a relationship.
Purpose of the cold opener, again, you're setting the genre, you're setting the tone. It's about monsters, dinosaurs, and it's a bit lighthearted. The character drama.
Be able to relate to at least one of those.
And within literally 30 seconds, you've just established what everything else, set the tone for everything else. Now we're into the exposition. This is the important information that your audience needs to know to understand your story. In this case, genetic modification, island, dinosaurs, yada, yada, yada. Who are the main characters? Great, I get it. Oh, now there's a problem. Oh, uh-oh. There's a dinosaur who's gonna escape.
We have an asset out of containment.
Okay, so what is the thing that we want? Well, we probably want these dinosaurs to capture these dinosaurs. How are we gonna do that? Actually, no, we're still in the problem phase.
She remembered where they put it in.
Oh God.
She's killing for sport.
Okay, now we got to come up with a plan. Hero comes in and explains the plan.
You got 20,000 people. You got no more boats. You don't have enough guns.
If we do this my way.
We got eyes on target.
Light it up!
All right, now we've got our major low point. This is where things aren't going quite as we've expected. And now we just show a whole bunch of obstacles.
They're communicating.
We're not solving any problems here or any of the obstacles. We're just showing all the potential obstacles that they're going to face.
Intelligent animal.
And you get it. I ran out of time, but this is my Mass Effect 2 trailer from a couple of years ago. Basically follows the same kind of structure. You have a cold opener, you set the exposition of what's going on, show the problem, what's the plan to solve that problem, what are the obstacles. And I won't, you guys can watch that on your own. Questions. I know I've probably gone a little longer than expected. Dave.
I think that was amazing. just so many little pieces there that I'm like, oh, now I get everything, and why those spoilers are in there, like you were saying. Dave had a great question though that I think is really, really important about the music being from the title versus unrelated. So I'd love for us to chat about that.
Yeah. I mean, in some cases, yes, if you are working on a title that has a built-in brand, so the brand of whatever you're working on is super important. If it is not necessarily a well-known brand like Marvel or if, you know, for a video game, there's a good, I would say, if it is a really recognizable and important aspect of your brand, use music from your game. But know that if you do that, you may need to work with the composer to punch it up a bit. So often game music, I dislike working with game music just because it's not designed for what you want to get out of the emotion. It's typically very flat and just is not made for the kind of structure you need. Now, if you have the opportunity to work with a composer from the team to take the kinds of sounds and build it into something that is more trailer-like and punch it up, great. So for example, in the Star Wars Squadrons trailer, we started the process of the early cuts with found trailer music, but then we worked with our Star Wars composer to bring in the Star Wars tracks. So you will probably never see a Star Wars movie that doesn't have iconic Star Wars sounds within it, just because you want to tap into that sort of the brand and the brand awareness. But if the brand doesn't have that kind of sonic that established sound, don't let that hold you back. It's probably more important to get the emotion and the attention than it is to try and be super accurate to and representative of the music.
I think that's really interesting to just even, you know, talk about these iconic franchises. I know, like working on Mass Effect, like that soundtrack is so well known, right? So to be kind of converting that to work into the small little frame that you want it in, it's probably not as easy to work with as people would imagine.
You mean for the music?
For the trailer,
yeah. I would often start sometimes with the game music, but end up feeling pretty frustrated because what you're looking for as an editor, especially for trailers, is that kind of built-in tempo to drive the story along. And if the game music isn't necessarily providing that, you end up with a piece that can feel a little bit flat. So and again, it's in some cases it's not about having the music, you know, the tempo and the energy up to 11. Sometimes, you know, a more subtle, nuanced sound is really important, especially for a more indie. If the art style is really unique, then it becomes more important to be really fitting with the visual style. So often it's kind of a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And just the eye tracking with Celeste, I'd never noticed that before until you pointed it out, that it is, the character is right where you expect it to be. And I just think that's really interesting, because I think we saw something similar in 33 games with Run Gun Jump Gun, because it's all that side scroller action, right? And you don't want people to be bouncing back and forth and getting a little nauseous. So that was very interesting to talk about. And is that something that you kind of recommend in general, not just for side scrollers, just to make sure people aren't?
Yeah, I mean, anytime there's actually a really good trailer, or not a trailer, a video on YouTube about the center composition for Mad Max the movie. and the director who basically any of the action scenes was always yelling at the DOP to frame the main character dead center in the screen. So the shots, it essentially allows the editor to, like, when they're editing, to not be constrained with what goes with which, because every single shot is center framed, and then the action is going to be in the middle of the frame. If the action's over here and then over here and then over here, it becomes really hard to follow, especially in something like Mad Max, where the action is just, and the cuts are so fast paced. But when you're watching it, it doesn't actually feel fast paced because everything is in the center. You're not having to look around the screen. So anytime that you're doing fast cuts and there's action, you really want to be mindful of that kind of, where the eye is on the screen.
Yeah, I think that's great. We have another question. This one's from Derek, and it's, how do you feel about interactive trailers? Just Cause franchise using a series of connected trailers to do a choose your own adventure experience, where it presented a choice at the end of each chapter in a sequence of videos that allowed you to experience your own story.
That's
is
cool.
Is that something that you can maybe talk about a little bit?
So I've come from doing a lot of interactive film stuff. I do have a big interest in it. The Webby Award I won a couple of years ago was actually for an interactive film called Invisible World. Just know that it's niche, and if your intention is to reach a really broad audience, it probably won't do that. I think it'll get some attention if it's really novel, but I think it's helpful if it's in support of something within the thing that you're marketing. But if I wouldn't ever force that as something kind of like the main, as like a major beat. It would be something that would be in support of, and maybe something that would be great for the core audience, the fan base that would love that kind of interactive experience while they're waiting for the game to come out. But again, I would say it's more on the side of a kind of a community or core audience as opposed to a broad, wider audience asset.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting too, because sometimes we get excited about these ideas and they sound super cool, but then not everybody tunes in, or they don't want to click through 6 videos. They just want to see the thing and see what's going on. I did want to chat a little bit about when you were talking earlier about Subnautica and how they put out those ones every 6 weeks. That's a lot of work. And even if it's just showing off one feature, like you were saying, trying to arrange it in an aesthetically pleasing way is not the easiest. Do you think that's an insane thing for people to try to keep up with?
At a certain size of studio, they have the ability to hire an in-person editor. And so I work at Improbable. I'm a sort of dedicated in-person. And so if you look at the production value of those videos, it's pretty light, to be honest. You are essentially showing off the new things that are in the game. Some developers will just come out with patch notes and say, these are the new things in our game, but it's like in a text file or it's a blog post. I think what their intention with that is to, make it a little bit easier. I think their ultimate goal is to build that community. And honestly, those kinds of light feature updates are pretty easy to do for an in-house editor. They wouldn't want to do, if they had to do that out of house with the vendor, that would just get crazy expensive. But if you have an indoor in-house editor, it's pretty easy actually.
That's good to know, because it does seem daunting, right? When you see something like every 6 weeks on track, especially for some of the smaller size studios.
Especially, it needs to make sense. Like for them, that the fact that they were doing a cadence of game updates every 6 weeks of new content, that's actually more daunting to me than making a video.
Yeah, definitely trying to stay on track for every 6 weeks. We have something to put out is definitely not the favorite of the dev team, I feel like.
Yeah.
Derek has another question. Is there a difference between a trailer that he might use to pitch to publishers versus a
Good
trailer
question.
to sell his game?
Good question. It really depends on what the I mean, I've done a lot of internal videos and some for publishers. Typically, I'm still looking for a brief from the game team or the marketing team of what it is that they're wanting to show. And so it really comes down to like what that relationship is you're building with a publisher. And what they are wanting to see. Often, they're looking for things where is the game going and evolving. And in some cases, you may want to be actually, have the dev team sit down and talk about stuff, show concept art. You can get away with a little bit of not as polished as and talking about where you want the game to be in 2 years versus what the game is right now. And so I would say that would be the biggest thing, is that it's more of a kind of the future of project, where it's going, and this is the team behind it and some of the innovations you are driving versus something that is purely public facing, which is just the stuff that's in the game right now.
Yeah, I think that's great. And just kind of in that same vein, I know some people, obviously, when you're working in AAA, you get ready for those big conventions, right? Your E3s or directs, everything. And there have been different versions of trailers for those rather than putting for sale. Is that kind of the same thing as just knowing where this is going to be shown?
Sorry, I missed a bit of your question. Was it around the E3?
Yeah. So when you're prepping for one that is going to be shown at like a convention, is that a different process?
Yeah. I mean, creatively, knowing that you have a good viewership who is sitting in their seats and not tuning away, you can spend a bit more time up front to establish kind of the world and the mystery a little bit. And some of the most creative trailers do come out at around that time, primarily because I think people feel like they have the freedom to like breathe a little bit in the trailers and not rush it, especially up front. And you're also, I mean, as well, you are trying to create an asset that is a little bit more broader appealing. It is not like about trying to get a sale right there. You are trying to create something memorable that has an emotional kick to it, that people will remember, because you're probably not going to be coming out for like, often it's like 6 months later, you may be actually releasing the game. So at that point, it is really kind of a broad facing mass market, just get people kind of remembering who you are kind of trailer.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, especially with the talk on spoilers earlier. I know I'm not a spoiler person. Like, I hate spoilers beyond anything. And for us, we did a showcase in May. Actually, some of your work was in it, Edmonton Direct, and it really had one trailer that I think was quite spoilerific, the new Dragon Age one, because if you hadn't played the other ones, it had quite a major spoiler in it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, when it talks about the Dreadwolf. And
right.
Yeah, so I was not sure of where to even include that when we were trying to make our kind of the run of show for Direct, because some people obviously hadn't seen that. And how do you what's the best way to balance something like that when you're going through like a trilogy? Like, even when you're working on something like Star Wars, there's obviously going to be spoilers. They're working on things for like decades in advance, it seems. How how do you balance that, giving away just enough, but not necessarily, boom, here's spoiling the last movie that you might have missed or the last game that you haven't finished yet?
Yeah, it's always a tough one. The problem is that, for example, with the Dreadwolf character, he is so pivotal to the entire game, probably, that you can't realistically keep that a secret for the entire campaign. So if something happens in the game in the first like half hour to an hour, that's like, from my experience, people are like, okay, that's not a spoiler. We just have to like be aware that that is a major character and story within the game. There are, I'm sure, plenty of spoilers later on of like what happens to them, or I don't know what they are, but those are the things that you'd need to be cautious of for sure. And I think the big thing is like, it is more and more about, it's really about like the setting the questions and mysteries in people's minds and not always like answering them. So like there are literally some trailers where it's like you're posing a question and then you're answering it, and then you're moving on, you're posing another question, you're answering it right away. For some people, I think they're fine. Maybe for that genre, they're okay with it. But I know, it definitely irritates people, and it's like, oh, now I don't need to watch that movie anymore. And that's definitely at that point it becomes when it's going too far. That I think you can tease the Dreadwolf, the mystery of him, but like not tell what happens to him.
Yeah, it's definitely that fine line, right, of just making sure it's not too crazy. So we have another question. This one's from TJ, and he's asking, just at the beginning, you showed your demo reel. How you even start kind of structuring something like that to show your skills or yourself in a showcase, because it can't follow those typical story beats as well.
Yeah, I mean, you still want to try and. I mean, this structure is a little bit more difficult for sure. It really, again, depends on who you're targeting. If it is like a new employer, if you're DOP, it is just simply demonstrating your sort of technical prowess and your eye for the work that you do. I mean, it is absolutely critical for anyone in the sort of film, in screen-based media and the creative side to have that demo reel. I think the kinds of structure that you can put into it, it may be more about just like the peaks and valleys in terms of tone, so that it's not just sort of like this wall to wall of footage that kind of doesn't change, that you have a sort of diversity of material in your that you've worked on. And again, to me, like, it is finding a right piece of music and allowing that music to somewhat give you some guidance on like the kind of structure within it. So if it's got those kind of good natural highs and lows, use that to your advantage to sort of like bring in your best material to sort of time it with the music itself.
Yeah, that's great. I think, the incorporation too of the streamers part and people reacting to your messaging was really, really interesting, because I haven't seen like obviously people get very invested in these games. So them actually watching your work and reacting to it and that being included, I thought that was really, really clever.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, honestly, it was always one of the best things about working at BioWare, just because their fan base is so passionate, that like the day after we would release the trailer, I would just like spend a couple hours and look up all of the fan reaction trailers. And it's a bizarre thing that it even exists, but it certainly feels good when you can see that sort of reaction in some of the fans.
Great. And we have another question. How much of an emphasis slash effort do you put on making live service trailers relevant over a game's life cycle? Or do you just let content of these trailers get stale as the live service game evolves? I think that's really interesting, especially with things that I'm sure you're not allowed to talk about.
Yeah, no, I mean, the live service cycle of your games is super important. You should never think of your marketing campaign ending on launch. That I mean, as long as you are in the market to continue to sell more, and if it's a subscription based or in-game purchases and new content coming in, the life cycle, the live service is super important. I find them more difficult creatively just because it is hard to get that sort of like hype wheel going. But you just need to really figure out again what it is that at each cycle, each major beat within the live service, what it is that's new and exciting, and find a way to like communicate that, if it's like major patch updates or I mean, it really depends on if it's like mobile games as well. Live service, I haven't done a lot of mobile marketing and creative, but I do know that they're really much more around targeting the in-game app ad spends are really important to the life cycle of their games, and how you continue to push that for years.
For sure. And if it's a game, like let's use like League of Legends, for example, obviously they've gone re-updated all of the skins to most of the characters in the games, texture changes, map changes, things like that. How much of that do you find necessary? Like, even if the game's not as well known, like let's say it's not a League of Legends, it's a like Lord of the Rings Online or something like that, where you're wondering about, do we just remake a whole new trailer for new players, or how do you kind of balance the old guard with attracting new players?
I mean, speaking of League of Legends, I would say Riot, in my opinion, is probably doing the absolute best game marketing in the world right now, hands down. The kind of cultural resonance that they're creating. I mean, they literally have created a top-selling music band as a marketing ploy, which is like unheard of. And the fact that it can actually feel authentic and have such a mass appeal. And a big area that I'm really passionate, love to see, are kind of original programming or sort of short stories of how a lot of these sort of like games like League of Legends that don't necessarily show well in the actual game mechanics in a big kind of cinematic trailer, how they can expand that universe within the kind of the fantasy in these CG trailers and the short films. And I mean, they're coming out with a movie in a couple of weeks on Netflix. And if at that sort of level, I mean, it is, in a way, it's almost unstoppable in terms of just like the reach that they can penetrate. So what was the question?
Let's say if you wanted to attract new players,
Yeah.
and maybe you don't have the reach
$1 billion.
that a Riot has,
Yeah.
and a all-star tier of like K-pop idols at your beck and call. So for if you're trying to create content that will attract new players, do you think it's important to kind of redo the process with the updated graphics, or is it one of those things where you can kind of marry them together?
I mean, it's usually not. I mean, it is usually continued. It's a good question. Yeah, I mean, in some cases, there are like, if you are seeing what's the mobile game that I'm constantly seeing that's been out for like, I'm sure 5 years, where they are still doing live action spots, and they what they do know is like they have a very good sense at that point is like how much it costs to bring a new player in, and they are willing to like spend $2 per acquisition because they know that over the course of a lifespan that person's on average going to spend $5. So even if they have to spend $2, that adds up to like, you know, a lot of money. It does make sense. And so you do see a lot of, like, for example, mobile games constantly doing these sort of big either CG spots or live action, because they're just like the churn of their audience is like probably certain finite, and they need that kind of constant fresh eyes. So they're pushing so and bringing them those players top of mind to come back to the game. So in that particular case, it may not be always feature updates. It just may be, look at how big we are, and you can't not notice us. So, it's I don't know. There's lots of. It's not easy for sure, especially for indie studios, how you sort of compete at that level, because they know that your spend is probably like 50 cents to their $2 per acquisition.
For sure. I know Derek said it in the chat, Raid
Shadow
Shadow
Legends.
Legends.
Thank you. Yes.
That's the one. Because I did see recently, like, they're working with Ninja now, and they made him a character in the game.
The most cringeworthy trailers I've ever seen. Oh my god.
Pretty terrible for sure. And then, we've seen partnerships with like Ariana Grande. She was in Final Fantasy Brave Exvius as well as Fortnite. Yep. And they get a trailer just for that featured character and people to get really excited about. And when it comes to influencer marketing, is it just about knowing where to spend your money? Like, if your audience is going to love Ninja, even if it's the cringiest thing they've ever seen, is that where you kind of put your eggs in that basket?
Yeah, I mean, typically there are influencers that fit your genre, and so you're finding those that are natural fit. I mean, I don't fully understand Ninja's his strategy these days. He's kind of seems to be all over the map in terms of the kind of games. But good for him. I did some work on another game called Scavengers that is also owned by Improbable, and we had a lot of success where it's just literally finding 5 or 6 of those influencers that we know will draw an audience of, let's say, 200,000 views or whatever to their channels. That costs X amount of dollars. And then there's also Twitch has a lot of things something called Twitch Prime events, where you're essentially giving awards away for people watching X amount of time of someone playing your game. So if you watched our game for half an hour, you would earn an in-game reward, or actually in that case, I think it was early access to the game. And I was actually blown away at how successful that was. I was very skeptical, but Twitch Prime events are like, I'm not sure if, how long they're going to last, but certainly just the sheer volume of people wanting to earn things within Twitch is watching influencers is pretty impressive.
Yeah, I think we saw the same thing with Riot when Valorant came out. That was how you got beta access. And it's very interesting how things like that have changed of where you put trailers in general too now. And, do you put your eggs more in making something absolutely gorgeous and put it all over the place? Or do you just rely on a ninja or someone to get the message out there?
Yeah. And some people, there are people who will only ever watch your game on Twitch and will never actually play it, and that's just a new avenue for entertainment. I don't get it, but it's certainly something that you need to be mindful of, and figuring out how to convert people from just passive Twitch viewing to an actual gamer.
Yeah, for me, it's only for the spooky games. That's when I let somebody else play for me, because no, I will never make it through it. I think I made it through the the tutorial to Outlast, and that was about it. I definitely cannot Outlast, but this has been so helpful, and I'm so excited that we got to have this chat. I think some really great questions too, and some really great learning that we can kind of pass on to the community. So 100%, I think people will be excited when we share the recording out as well, so that they can get a chance. But if folks want to follow you or maybe get in touch with you, how do they do that?
Let me back up. I think I had it on my first slide. Oh geez, that's gonna take a while. There you go. Don't go to my website. I keep saying this, and I really I've not touched my website in God knows how many years. So it is sorely out of date. But by all means, you can email me at my Gmail. Happy to answer any questions, follow-ups there.
Amazing. And then we just wait for the trailer to drop for an unannounced game from Improbable.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I think we are so excited to see what's going on over there. I know we give them pokes constantly, but tell us what's going on. So super excited for that. Thank you again for joining us.
My pleasure.
I feel like I learned a ton just even from actually breaking down these little bits and pieces. So I really appreciate you taking the time tonight. And yeah, hopefully we can have you back to talk a little bit more about this in the future. And I'm definitely excited to have you around in the community. We're very lucky to have someone local.
Thank you very much for having me. It was actually really actually great to put all these thoughts down into a document. I haven't actually done that before. So yeah.
Definitely. It works out for everybody. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks,
and
everyone.
Thanks for everybody in the chat. If you have any questions, make sure to check out Galen, not his website, but definitely make sure to watch that Mass Effect 2 trailer when you get a chance. It is the one that people definitely still mention constantly to us. So thank you, everybody, and have a great night.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.